Okay, so this lesson is solving equations. It's a review topic from last year. So if you look at the do now, it just says to jot down anything that you remember about solving equations from last year. So some of the key things I remember is that an equation has an equal sign. That's one of the key things of an equation in itself, right? So when you see an equal sign, you can actually solve, which is what we're going to do today. The other thing I always think about is I always think of opposite operations. When you're solving an equation, you always use opposite operations. And what that means is if I see a plus or a positive, I would do the opposite, which is a negative. And if I see multiplication, the opposite of that would be division. Okay, so that's just two things that always pop into my head when I think about equations. Okay, so the next here just talks about some nice steps that we have come up with. So solving equations, step 1 is to draw a line through the equal sign. Step 2 says to simplify each side, and I added in the words distribute here because you can either combine like terms or you can distribute. Then kind of circle that variable that you want to solve for. So if you're dealing with x, circle that x, right? And then use your inverse operations. Inverse, another word for inverse, would be opposite, which is what I kind of wrote down on the first do now part here. Okay, then of course you can most certainly substitute and check to make sure that your work is correct. And when you're done, the left side of your equation should equal the right side. So let's try this. And we're going to start off real basic here and then work our way to more difficult questions. So step 1 says to draw a line down that equal sign. So that's going to be my first step. Step 2 says to simplify each individual side. And in this case, there is nothing for me to actually simplify. So now I'm going to circle that variable. I want to solve for x, right? So I have to now use inverse operations to do that. So the opposite of positive 5 is negative 5. Okay, and what you do to one side of that line, you have to do to the other side as well. It's like keeping it balanced. So now when we solve this, the 5s cancel out because they're inverses. My x drops down, my equal sign comes down, and 14 minus 5 is 9. So now for this one, I will show you how to check it. So what you would do to check it is now you know that x is 9, right? So my original problem was x plus 5 is equal to 14. So now what I could do is I could plug in that 9 for x. And what I should end up with is the left side, when I add that 9 plus 5, I should get that 14 is equal to 14, right? So that's how you know you're right. So now this was an easy one to substitute back into, so we did it. Okay, you don't always have to do this substitution back in. It's good practice to make sure you're right. So if you were taking like a Regents or a test, it's a good method to use. Okay, so I would pause the video and I would try these two. Again, use your inverses to solve, then check. Okay, so if you pause the video and now you're trying them, you should have first drawn your line down the equal sign, right? You're solving for this x here. So the inverse of a minus 9 or negative 9 would be plus 9. And you would cancel out your inverses on the left. I'd drop down my x and I'd be left with 11 plus 9, which is 20. Okay, and again, to check this, I could take that original equation, negative 9 plus x is equal to 11, and I could just replace my x now with 20. And again, I'm just checking to make sure that when I combine the left side here, negative 9 plus 20, that I get 11, right? And when I do add negative 9 plus 20, I do get that 11 is equal to 11, and that's how you know you're correct. Okay, so number 2, when we look at this one, we draw our line down the equal sign. So now this one, we actually do have to simplify the right side. So the 21 is not going to change. That's going to stay the same. We're not changing that at all, right? Just drop it down. But we can actually combine negative 7x plus 4x. Those are like terms. So negative 7 plus 4 is negative 3x. Okay, and then now you're going to get x by itself, right? X is what we want alone. So to do that, these are being multiplied together. We're going to do the opposite, which means we divide. So x would equal 21 divided by negative 3, which is negative 7. So your answers, guys, are what x is equal to. Okay, so now if you also tried number 3 here, we're going to first draw our line down the equal sign, right? We don't have to combine or simplify anything. Everything is kind of simplified. Now I want this x alone, so I have to get rid of this 12, right? The 12 is positive, so the inverse of that, or the opposite, is minus 12. So I'm going to subtract 12 on both sides, right? The 12s will cancel. And negative 4 and a negative 12, when we combine those together, is going to get us negative 16 equals x. Okay, so those were pretty basic ones. Now we're going to kind of get into the multi-step equation. So we're going to follow the same steps that we did above, right? But we're going to isolate that variable last. So use the inverses again to solve and check. So we're first, again, following those same steps. Draw your line down your equal sign, right? Our goal is to get this variable alone. That's our goal, right? I only have one of them, so I don't have to combine like terms. I don't have to distribute here, but I do have to use inverse operations. So if I want to get x alone, I'm first going to remove the positive, or if it was subtraction, the subtraction. So in this case, I have a positive 5, and the opposite of positive 5 is negative 5. So again, what you do to one side, you must do to the other. So those would cancel. I'm going to bring down my 2x, and 15 minus 5 is 10. And then again, I want to still solve for x, right? My goal is to get x by itself, so I have to remove this 2. 2 and x are attached with multiplication. The opposite of multiplication is to divide. So x is equal to 5. Okay, so now let's try this. So multi-step, right? So my goal, again, we want to draw the line down the equal sign, is to get m, in this case, alone. Well, I don't just have one m here, I have 2. So the first step I need to do is actually combine these two terms. They're like terms, so I want to combine them. So negative 2 plus 9 would be 7m. My plus 8 gets dropped down. My equals comes down, and so does my negative 13. Okay, now what we're going to do here is our goal again is to isolate this m. So I want to get rid of this plus 8 here attached at the end. So I'm going to subtract 8 from both sides. So these will cancel. Negative 13 minus 8 is negative 21 equals 7m. Okay, and again, my goal is to get m alone. So I want to undo 7 times m. The opposite of timesing is dividing. So I'm going to end up with negative 21 divided by 7, which is negative 3 equals m. Okay, so now what we're going to add into these problems is the distributive property. So the distributive property says that whatever number's on the outside of a parenthesis, we need to multiply into all the terms. So we're going to first draw our line down the equal sign. That doesn't change. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take the term on the outside, the number on the outside, that negative 6, and we're going to multiply it in. So negative 6 times 1 is just negative 6. And negative 6 times a negative 5v would be a positive 30v. Okay, and that equals 54. So now again, key thing to remember here is that you are solving for the variable, which is the v, right? So I want to get rid of that minus 6. That would be the first thing I want to do. So I'm going to add 6 to both sides. So 30v is equal to 60 because 54 plus 6 is 60. And now again, I'm solving for v, so I want to divide to get rid of that 30 on both sides. My goal of getting v alone now came to the bottom, and 60 divided by 30 would just be 2. Okay, so in the one next to here, we don't see an actual number in the front of the parenthesis to distribute, but technically when that happens, there's really a 1 there. So the number that you're going to distribute here is actually going to be a negative 1. So draw your line and then distribute your negative 1. So negative 1 times n would just be negative 1n. Negative 1 times a negative 8 would be a positive 8. Bring down your equals and your negative 2. Okay, now again, your goal is to get the variable alone. We want n by itself. So the first step thing I need to get rid of is this plus 8. So we're going to subtract 8 from both sides. So the 8s will cancel because they're inverses. And negative 2 plus a negative 8 or negative 2 minus 8 is negative 10. And that is equal to negative 1n. So we're almost done, but we still have a negative 1 attached to this n. And in order for me to undo that, since this is multiplication, we're just going to divide by negative 1. So I'm going to end up with positive 10 is equal to n. Okay, so those are some equations that involve the distributive property. We have a third one here, so what I would do is pause the video and try this. Okay, so once you've tried it now, to get your answer, you draw your line down your equal sign. Okay, and then the number outside the parentheses is 10, so that's what we're going to distribute. So 10 times 1 is 10. 10 times 3b is 30b, and that's equal to negative 20. So now again, my goal is to get this b alone, so the first thing I have to get rid of is what's being added to that. So I have a positive 10 here. I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides. So the 10s will cancel because they're inverses. My 30b comes down. And negative 20 and negative 10 is negative 30. And now my final step is to just divide. So I end up with b is equal to negative 1. Okay, so let's just practice these. What I would do for these is pause the video again, try them on your own, and then check your work. Okay, so if you tried them at this point, you should follow and check your answers. So on the left side here, I have 42, and then I have 8m plus 13m. So I do have a variable, which is the m, but I do have 2 of them. So before I do anything, I want to combine like terms here. So I'm doing 8 plus 13 to get 21m. And that's bring down your equals and bring down your 42. And now you really have one step, right? The only thing you're going to do now is undo this multiplication. So we're going to divide by 21 on both sides. So here on the right, we'd cancel out the 21s. We'd be left with just m, which is our goal. And then we're going to divide 42 divided by 21 to get 2. Okay, number 2 on the right over here is exactly the same. It's just reversing the terms over the equal sign. So draw your line. Okay, just like we did in the last one, we're solving for a variable, which in this case is p, right? We have 2 p's. So before we could do anything, we have to combine like terms. So negative 10p plus 9p would be negative 1p is equal to 12. Okay, and again, our goal is to solve for p. So I need to get rid of this negative 1 that's being multiplied here. So to undo multiplication, we do division. So I'm dividing by negative 1 to get p is equal to negative 12. Okay, and then number 3, okay, we're still going to do the same steps. So draw your line down the equal sign. I am going to look for the variable I want to solve for, which in this case is r, and I have 2 of them. So before we move on, we need to combine like terms. So I have 6r plus 6r is 12r. My minus 1, I'm just going to bring down, equals 11. Okay, and now I'm going to try to isolate that r, right? I want that r alone. Before I do anything, I got to get rid of that minus 1 here. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. They'll cancel here, and I'll get 12r equals 11 plus 1 is 12. And to get r by itself, our final step is to divide. So r is equal to 1. Okay, so again, we have more practice here. This is really good to try. Again, pausing the video and then try to check your work and see what you got, if it compares, and then you can figure out your mistakes. So again, first step, draw the line down the equal sign. So here we have 2 terms on each side. I have a negative 4y and a 16 here, and then I have a negative 20 and a 32. So on this side, my left side, I do not have like terms. I can't combine anything here. So what we're going to do is just rewrite these and bring them down. There's nothing for us to kind of work on that side. Okay. On the right side, however, we have a negative 20 and a positive 32. They're technically like terms. We can combine them, right? So negative 20 plus 32 would be positive 12. And now what we have is a 2-step equation. So when we look to solve this, our goal is to get y by itself, right? So the first thing I want to get rid of is that positive 16. So I'm going to make it negative 16 or minus 16. So I have negative 4y equals negative 4. And my final step to get the y alone is to divide out that negative 4. So this will cancel, leaving me with y equals negative 4 divided by negative 4 is 1. Okay, so now we kind of involve basically all of our steps. So let's try this one. And again, be careful. We have a lot of terms here. So we're going to draw our line down our equal sign. We have what we see parentheses here. So to get rid of those parentheses, we are going to distribute. The number we're going to distribute here is that negative 8. So negative 8 times a negative 8x would be a positive 64x. Negative 8 times negative 6 is positive 48. And on the right side here, I can't combine anything. I can't distribute, so I'm just going to bring it down. Okay, so now what you're going to do is we have x's on both sides. We have numbers on both sides. So I always like to say pick something that looks easy for you and you can move it, right? I also think a good method is to look at your variables first, right? And move your smaller one. I always think you're moving, so it's easier to carry less. So 64 and negative 6. Negative 6 is way smaller than 64. So the way I would do this is I would take that minus 6x and I want to cross over the equal sign, right? So I have to change the sign of it with addition. So these will cancel. Now I'm combining my x's. So 64 plus 6 would be 70x. The plus 48 comes down, and so does the negative 22. Now I have a 2-step equation. This is what we kind of worked on from the beginning. So I want to again solve for x. That's my goal. So I want to get rid of this plus 48 first. So I'm going to subtract 48 from both sides of my equation. So they'll cancel here. My 70x comes down, equals drops down, and this is like combining like terms here, or combining or adding, I should say, because they're both negative. So negative 22 plus a negative 48 would be a negative 70. And then we're going to divide by 70 on both sides to get x alone. So x is equal to negative 1. Okay, so this lesson should have been a good review of equations. It will definitely help us work through the rest of these geometry topics. If you are still confused, I'm going to post a couple more YouTube videos that will hopefully help, or you can always email.